On January 5th of 2025, I will have 8 years clean and sober. How did I get there? Greetings and welcome to Storytime with the Dangerous Gentleman. Yes, I am the Dangerous Gentleman. No, I did not give myself that nickname, but I certainly did earn it. Like I said in the introduction, on January 5th of next year, 2025, which is just a little over a week away, I will have 8 years clean and sober. That's 8 years of no alcohol. That's 8 years of no hard drugs, 8 years of no marijuana, 8 years of no mind-altering substances, other than when I was in the hospital with my gallbladder. So, 8 years clean and sober. I've told a lot of my story about how I ended up as an addict, and I've told the aftermath of what happened after I got sober. But I haven't really touched on the idea of the actual process that it took for me to get sober. As you can imagine, there's a lot to it. And so this is probably going to be a 2-part episode. First of all, I did not grow up in an alcoholic family. Like, no one in my family has had any issues with substances. My uncle, my dad's brother, was an alcoholic, and he got sober before he died. But other than that, I had no real experience with anyone who was an alcoholic. I knew people who were, but they weren't close to me and they never really talked about that part of their life. So when I started to go down that road, I really didn't have a whole lot of people to talk to. And there I was in a relationship with someone else who was also an addict. And I didn't know what it meant. If I had known then what I know now, I would have handled things differently, because even prior to when we got married, if I had been aware, the signs were there. And so, occasionally, my ex-wife would drink too much. And she'd feel some conviction about it, and then she would decide that, all right, I'm going to stop drinking for a while. And we would not have alcohol in the house for a period of time. I was okay with it because, I enjoyed drinking, but it wasn't really a big deal to me. I could just be like, all right, well, I enjoy a beer, or not have a beer. I had really only been drunk a handful of times at that point, and I was in my mid-30s. And so there I was, and we would have no alcohol in the house for a month or two, and then she'd be like, well, I feel like I've gotten some control over this, and I think it would be okay for us to have some alcohol in the house. And because, again, I didn't know about the nature of all of it, I'd be like, okay, cool. Well, I want to drink a beer on occasion, so I'm going to go grab a 6-pack. And then we'd enjoy it. And for a while, she would be okay. She would drink a beer or two, or a glass of wine or two. And then pretty soon it would start to creep up again, more and more and more. And then one night she would get way drunk and do something crazy that she would end up regretting and feeling guilty about. And then we would give up, and we'd be like, all right, we're not going to have alcohol in the house. We need to take another break. And so then we take another break, and then eventually it would creep back in. And because I didn't know the nature of addiction. I didn't know the nature of all of that. I didn't know that she just needed to stop, and that I should have just laid it all down. Right. At that point in my life, I had really only ever drank. And again, maybe a handful of times where I had drank too much. And I remember, and she had a history. She had a long history of drugs and alcohol, marijuana, hard drugs, all of it. She had done all of it. I remember one night, she had been visiting some friends, and she came back, and she was like, Andrew, they had some marijuana, and I smoked some marijuana with my friends. Now I knew them too, and I didn't even know that they smoked marijuana. But she came back and she was like, yeah, I smoked marijuana. And at first, I got real upset. Cooled down a little bit. And then that night, we had been visiting my mom. And that night we drove back to our house, about 2 hours away. And she's like, just so you know, I actually brought some marijuana back with me in case you want to try some. And again, at first I was upset, but then I was like, okay, let's give it a try. And I smoked marijuana for the first time that night. And lo and behold, I enjoyed it. Then we had alcohol and marijuana in regular circulation in the house. And again, it would be like sometimes there would be too much, and then we'd back off. Well, fast forward a few years, and it became a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. And then we went through all the issues with our kids, where our kids got taken away, not because of alcohol or drugs. It was other related but unrelated stuff. That's another story for another day. But now we didn't have the kids in the house in any way to kind of regulate things, and she started to drink a lot again. And she wasn't supposed to, because she had issues with the courts, and she was supposed to go in for drug and alcohol tests regularly. And she almost got in trouble a few times because of that. But anyway, like, again, so that was like 2014. Fast forward 2016, and like, I smoked and or used marijuana of some kind a couple, 2, 3, 4 times a week. Sometimes more than that. But it wasn't like it was any ever really big deal for me. And I would occasionally drink, but usually like not to excess. It just wasn't my thing. But she would. And like we would just kick it out sometimes. And then all the stuff started to happen with our kids, and things started to spiral out of control. And eventually she started to use methamphetamines again. And I've told you the story in a previous episode of the first time I used methamphetamines. Again, it's like, it's one of those things that for me, looking back on it now, if I had looked back from earlier in my life until that point, and if I look from now back to that point, I'm like, how did I end up in that position? How was it so easy for me to go from, oh, I've never smoked marijuana, and then all of a sudden, boom. Or I've never even considered, I would never use methamphetamines. But there I was, boom. And it was, in the moment, it was easy for me to do. That was the summer of 2016, which I have talked a fair amount about. And that summer, really, like, in a lot of ways, it came to a head when I had a meeting with my attorney, with a counselor, with a social worker, and a couple other people that called me all into a meeting saying, Andrew, we're concerned about what we think is going on. We don't know what's going on, but we're concerned about what we think is going on. And that's when I broke down in front of them and said, yeah, I've been using alcohol, I've been using drugs, methamphetamines, marijuana, all of it. That started with me, like, I wanted to cope. When my wife told me back in February of 2016 that she wanted a divorce, and that was all there was to it, I started to look for other ways to cope. And it started with me going to the doctor and starting to take a bunch of prescriptions. Like, I would go to the doctor and say I'm depressed, so they would write me a prescription for antidepressant. I would say I couldn't sleep. They wrote me a sleeping pill, anti-anxiety pills. I had a whole bunch of pharmaceutical drugs that I was using to cope, rather than turning to any kind of healthy coping mechanisms. And again, this was not, like, I am, generally speaking, not a big fan of pharmaceutical drugs. Like, I'm not, because I think there's better ways to deal with things. But at the time, I was just so lost and so unwilling to face my own issues that I turned to coping mechanisms. And I was sleeping in my pastor's basement, and every night I was drinking myself to sleep, or taking too many sleeping pills, or smoking a bunch of marijuana, or all three of those things all at once in order to actually sleep. And it was like I would fall asleep for a couple hours and wake up and not be able to get back to sleep. It was miserable. Like, my stomach literally felt like it was in knots all the time. I felt nauseous. I felt sick. I really wasn't sleeping. I had no appetite. I was losing weight, not in a healthy way. So I was trying to cope in every single possible way. And it all culminated in that meeting that I had with those people, because I was supposed to be the one that was supposed to keep my shit together in dealing with the situation with our kids because they had no faith. Danielle, they had no faith in my ex-wife because they knew really deep down what kind of a person she was and that she was going to be able to hold it together to get the kids back. So they were looking at me for that. Well, deep down, like I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to do that by myself. And I wasn't ready to lose her. And I wasn't ready to lose everybody and everything. I didn't care about myself enough. I was like, hey, screw everything. Right. But like the external part of me wasn't ready to lose all of that. But I was trying to put on a good front that I was trying to hold on. But deep down, I was like, I was a mess inside. I didn't know how to deal with any of it. So I started to use all that stuff. And then we had that meeting. I held my arm out. I had scabs on my arm from where my ex-wife had scratched me trying to steal something from me. Like I had bruises from where she tried to beat me up. Oh, she had been arrested. She got arrested for that. And I was basically homeless at the time. I didn't have any place to go. I was barely working, barely making any money. I was sleeping anywhere and everywhere I could. And so they said, Andrew, you need to get your act together now, or you're going to lose all of this forever. You're going to have nothing, and you're going to lose your rights forever. And that was, that was end of June, early part of July. And that was right around the time when I finally called my brother and said, this is what's going on. And I finally started to confess a bunch of things. And so I told my brother, got my bus ticket down from Spokane to Colorado. And the night before I went there, like an idiot, I ended up hanging out with my ex-wife one more time. Did methamphetamine for the last time. I got down to Colorado, and that day before I went to Colorado was the last time I used methamphetamine. And so I started counting clean time from that day forward. Now, if you know anything, which I'll get into later, that's not clean time, because I would still, like, people were saying you should at least try to quit everything, at least for a while. And I kind of did, but I really didn't, because I was still, like, when I was at staying at my brother's house, he had a meeting to go to, and I found a weed store not far from where we were, and I went in there and bought some edibles. And I went back to his house, and unbeknownst to him, I got high as hell on some edibles. Just passed out on his couch. And I would still occasionally have a beer and drink, and I would occasionally smoke pot, and I would occasionally use drugs. Not any hard drugs, like I said, just marijuana. But I was still counting that the last time I used hard drugs, the last time I used methamphetamine as my clean date. Then I went back to Spokane after staying with my brother for a couple of months, and again was a wreck, and I was still hanging out with addicts. I just wasn't using methamphetamines. I wasn't using hard drugs. I would still occasionally drink, still occasionally use pot. But the people that I would hang out with had at least some level of respect, and they wouldn't push me to try anything different. And then I moved into a clean and sober house, and I gave it all up for a while. But even then, eventually, I started to sneak stuff into that house. And I was going to meetings, and I was starting to learn more and more about what it looks like, what recovery looks like, and what the 12 steps of recovery look like. But I wasn't really necessarily even applying them, because I was still, like, I was a little, like, I was reading my Bible more, and I was going to church, and we were having check-ins, and we were talking, I was going to the meetings at church, and when I say meetings, those of you who know. When I say meetings, I mean Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. That's a meeting to me. And so I would go to these meetings, and I would say, my clean date is, I have X many days sober or clean, because I didn't know what it meant, but I was starting to. So I lived in that recovery house for a while, from August, September-ish to January 5th of 2017. And if you do the math, if you remember what I said at the beginning, June 5th of 2025 will be 8 years clean and sober. So I was there and I was packing up my stuff to leave Spokane to move to Yakima to take the job. And as I was packing up my stuff, I found a joint or half a joint in my stuff that I didn't even know was there. And I said, screw it. And I went outside and I walked around the block and I smoked this other half a joint and got stoned. I was pretty good at hiding it. I had gotten drunk on New Year's Eve. No one knew. So I got stoned and I went for a walk, came back, did all sprayed, whatever, make sure I didn't smell like weed. Came home, passed out, woke up in the morning, threw all my stuff in my buddy's van, and he drove me down to the bus station. And I got on the bus and I moved to Yakima on a Friday. And so that whole weekend, I went and I didn't try real hard, but I kind of tried. I didn't have a car, so I couldn't necessarily get everywhere, but I was trying to find a place to get some weed that weekend because I was still calling June my clean date. And so I was saying I had July, August, September, October, November, December. I was claiming I had 5-6 months clean, but there I was looking for weed. And I would have smoked some. I would have used some had I found any that weekend. And so I went through that weekend and I went to church and I started the job on Monday morning, went into the office. I don't remember why or how or what the thought process was, but that day I looked up on the computer where a meeting was because I knew that I needed more. I knew I needed something. I didn't know anybody and I didn't want to just go home and sit alone by myself in my apartment and watch TV with my thoughts. So I knew I had to go somewhere and do something. So I found a meeting that happened to be halfway between my office and my apartment. I got done at the office at 6. If I just walked home, it took me about an hour. And the meeting started at 6:30 and it was about halfway in between. So I was like, eh. And the whole time I'm walking there, I'm thinking, am I going to go? Am I not going to go? Am I going to go? I'm super nervous. I don't know what this is all about. Da, 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 da. So I just decided I was walking by and I was like, I'm just going to go in. So I went in and I walked into my first meeting. The name of the meeting was What It's Like. And it was at the Narcotics Anonymous meeting hall. And it was January 7th or 8th. And I walked into my first meeting. And that first meeting changed my life because I learned that there were other people that were just like me, if not worse. And people are telling the stories and I'm learning the process and I'm saying the Narcotics Anonymous prayers and I hear the 12 steps for the first time and I hear all the traditions and I hear all the sayings and I hear all the stuff. And it was just like a foreign language to me. They said, the newcomer is the most important person at this meeting. And I didn't say anything. And they got to the end of the meeting and something inside of me told me I needed to say something. Something inside me prompted me. That was not the kind of person that I was. I didn't do that kind of thing. And I just said, hi, my name is Andrew. I'm a new person here. The meeting was basically over. We had gone past time and they're like, does anyone else? And I said, well, I'm Andrew and I'm a newcomer. And I know I waited, but I'd like to share. And they said, absolutely, of course. And I emotionally vomited over that group of people, none of which I had ever met before. There were probably 30 people there, complete total strangers. And I told them about a 2-minute version of my story, most of which I spent blaming other people. But I emotionally vomited. And they said, welcome, Andrew. They said, welcome. And again, like I said, I was claiming about 6 months sobriety at that time. That's how I ended up in my first meeting and how I got introduced to the 12 steps and how I got introduced to the idea of recovery versus sobriety. So sobriety means you're not doing whatever the thing is. Recovery means you're actually doing the work to stay that way. And I realized that there was going to be work ahead of me. And I realized at that point that I might be sober, but I wasn't. I wasn't doing the work yet. Someone that night said, if you're new, if this is your first time, commit to going to a meeting every single day. And I committed at that point in my brain, in my mind. I was like, I'm going to go to a meeting every single day for as long as it takes. And I didn't miss a meeting at that 6:30 meeting, what it's like, for months. That's a story. That's where we're going to leave off the first time. So the end of part one is my first time in an NA meeting. And there's a lot more to tell because I haven't even admitted, this was just the start. So if you are out there and you're wondering what it takes time and it takes work. So I'll encourage you that if you need help, if you need recovery, if you need anything like that, find one of those meetings and go. It was my first step in admitting, and step one is admitting that I was powerless over my addiction and that my life had become unmanageable. And that's a great first step in dealing with any kind of issue that you have. So that's where I'm going to leave off. Again, if you like anything that you see, if you like anything that you hear, click the like button, share it with your friends, and check out my links in the description down below. I'd love to talk with you. I'll talk to you later.
So if you like this content, please give it a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me and what I'm all about and what I can maybe do for you, check out my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. That's thedangerousgentleman.org. Thank you for listening.